Hey everyone, I hope you're having a wonderful time so far. I figured we should take a little break and catch our breath before we continue with the show. My name is Diago Titan, Tommy Titan's cousin. I'm from Brazil and I'm here today to tell you about this amazing country and a very special person that changed the arts forever. So let's begin with a little timeline on the history of Brazil. Pre-10,000 BC, peopling of the Americas from Asia. 7,000 through 1,500 BC, settlements of areas of Brazil by the G in the Central Highlands and spread from north to south. Many groups of Tupi speakers including Munduruku, Tupinamba, and Guarani. 1500, the first Portuguese conquistadors stepped foot in Brazil, cultivating the land into sugarcane plantations. 1538, to keep up with demand of sugarcane exports, plantation owners stole and purchased slaves from Africa. Between 1500 and 1800, over 2.8 million slaves were stolen or purchased and sent to Brazil. 1538 through 1888, black slaves who resisted the slavery regime began to form Quilombo communities throughout Brazil. 1565, Rio de Janeiro is founded. 1800s, wars of control break out between the government and slave-led Quilombo communities, leading to a near centuries-long conflict. 1825, Brazil becomes an independent state, finally breaking away from the Portuguese government. 1830, Brazil ends external slave trade. 58 years pass. 1888, the Golden Law is passed, which abolishes slavery in Brazil forever. 1889, Brazil is declared a republic. 1944, the Black Experimental Theater is created to confront the lack of representativeness and dignity of black people in the national performing arts. 1964, a military coup occurs and the country is thrown into dictatorship. 1965, Black Awareness Day becomes a national holiday, and the date is changed to November 20th in honor of the legendary hero Zumbi's death. While I could go on and on about the history of Brazil, at least you now have the foundation for our story today. Let's go back a little bit to 1914. 1914, in a city in Sao Paulo state named Franca, a man named Abdias do Nascimento is born. Now this is the person we'll be focusing on today. The story of Abdias Nascimento is an important one in the history of Brazil and the legacy of theater of the oppressed, a tale of fighting against prejudice and promoting the arts in a manner previously unheard of. So how did it begin? As stated before, Nascimento was born in Franca, Sao Paulo state. His father was a musician and shoemaker, and his mother made candies to sell on the street. His grandparents were some of the last generation of slaves, too. Things started picking up after he was dishonorably discharged from his military service in the 1930s. He enrolled in the University of Rio de Janeiro in 1938, graduated with a bachelor's in economics. Additionally, during the 1930s, Nascimento joined the Brazilian Integralist Action. This was a group centered around bringing Brazilians together as one nation, and has also sparked the start of Nascimento's long career in politics. The reasoning for Nascimento's involvement in civil rights came from a long life experience of discrimination and prejudice by white individuals in Brazil. He spoke on certain altercations he had to endure, most famously his barring from a nightclub dance floor. He states that in Jaguaro, Rio Grande do Sul, "I was not allowed on the dance floor because of my low color," I was told. In 1939, Nascimento began traveling throughout South America with a group of poets called Santa Hermandad Orquídea. During his time with the group, he saw a production of The Emperor Jones. This was a particularly important event as it shaped the course of Nascimento's entire life in a single moment. When the curtain was raised and the lights went up, Nascimento was appalled. The lead character was being played by a white man in blackface. It was then that he decided to create black theater in Brazil with the goal of fighting racism and discrimination through art. Nascimento spent the next year in Argentina with Teatro de Pueblo in Buenos Aires. This time was spent learning the technical and performance aspects of the theater. Upon his return to Sao Paulo, he was imprisoned for resisting racial discrimination. During his time in prison at the Carandiru Penitentiary, Nascimento created the Convicts Theater. There they began writing, directing, and producing their own plays for other inmates to see. After his release, Nascimento returned to Rio de Janeiro and created the Black Experimental Theater. This would be his mark on the world. The Black Experimental Theater was created in 1944 and premiered its first show. The Emperor Jones in 1945, the show was met with a high acclaim and the theater began sparking activism across the country, inspiring many different movements. Their first original production was The Prodigal Son of Lucio Cardoso, and was met with the high praise. Some critics even wrote that it was the best production of the year. The show was so popular that it toured into Europe for 10 years. Nascimento also began his political career with the Afro-Brazilian Democratic Committee in 1946. With this committee, they pushed for anti-racist legislation, organized the first Congress of the Brazilian Negro, and published a newspaper. Nascimento continued working and expanding theater until tragedy struck in 1968. A military coup took place and he was exiled. Between 1968 and 1981, Nascimento continued his work in the United States. He expanded his use of art and theater to give voices to those without. Over 13 years, he held many art exhibitions and experiences to tell these stories to the American people. All of his work was met with much praise. He even worked in many highly regarded institutions like Yale and Howard University. After the military coup was defeated, Nascimento returned to Brazil, and in 1983, he became the first Afro-Brazilian congressman. He focused his proposals around any discrimination and fighting for marginalized communities. He also proposed affirmative action in the workforce. Nascimento continued his work in the government throughout 1994. During this time, he brought anti-apartheid measures and the Nambian independence movement. He was always a man of the people. The legacy of Nascimento's actions still live on in Brazil. While there is still much work to do in the way of civil rights, he laid the foundation and got a good start on it. He pushed through laws and policies that protect Afro-Brazilian individuals and Quilombo communities. He advocated for affirmative action and anti-discrimination in the government too. His government work has inspired millions around the world. What is more fascinating, however, is the legacy of his art. Nascimento laid the foundations of the theater of the oppressed. He brought the voices of the oppressed people of Brazil into the spotlight. He spoke on uncomfortable topics and wasn't afraid to hide details about how black individuals were treated. He also laid the framework for people like Augusto Boal. Boal took what Nascimento started and expanded it. Boal formulated methods that used theater for social change to better society, a method called forum theater. He took situations that happen in everyday life, things that people knew about, and built performances around them. Using audience guidance, everyone could work as a collective to uncover a best plan for action in the event. A bit later in the show, we will be able to experience forum theater firsthand. Everyone will have a chance to have their voices heard to solve the issue that will be presented. It's going to be a very exciting time. At the end of the day, Abdias Nascimento was an amazing man. Through his work with the government to his work in the theater, he is an inspiration to all. He stood strong in the face of oppression and fought back. He used theater in ways that were unheard of as well. Theater of the oppressed is such a wondrous art form. But I digress. Thank you for your time today. I hope that you take some time to research much more on the life of Abdias Nascimento, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the show as well. Goodbye.